All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to HHRAC's podcast. Today, we have a very special guest, and he's going to introduce himself. He is from a very special mission, and he will share his story, and we will get more information from him. But without further introduction, I want to introduce Mr. Bob Reynolds.
Hi, thank you, Robert. Thanks for having me on here.
Of course. Now, Bob, you were a part of some special ops missions called VO-67, correct?
Yes, sir.
Can you please give a brief introduction on what VO-67 was?
Well, it was a clandestine organization that was put together by Robert McNamara and the president to track troops and supplies down the Ho Chi Minh Trail in Laos and Vietnam so that we could slow the flow of that down. I had no idea. I was originally at Moffett Field in a transport squadron, and it was an Air Force aircraft maintained by Navy people. And the Air Force decided they wanted to take these transport aircraft back, so they dismantled the squadron that I was in. You know, at that time, I had been married for about a year, had a small baby, and I was very concerned because my next trip was going to be sea duty. And to a sailor, that's leaving the country either on a ship or in another country. And I was concerned about my wife and daughter. Then I was told that there was a special new squadron that was going to be formed. And they didn't say exactly what it was because nobody knew what it was really, but there was a chance they were going to be training in the States. And I wanted to stay where I could possibly bring my wife and baby. And so I volunteered with this organization, along with the squadron I was in was BR-8. It was a transport squadron, but there were many sailors there that were looking not to go to sea duty, and so a lot of them ended up in this squadron. Now,
Thank you.
My rate was a aviation electronics technician, and this new squadron was going to be relying on a lot of electronic apparatus, so they were eager to get me, along with the other ones, the other ATs.
Nice. So, if you can give me, we're gonna take a few steps back here.
Okay.
Childhood, right? So, for your childhood, where were you raised?
I was born and raised in Phoenix, Arizona. I became of age during a draft situation. A lot of younger people these days don't even know what a draft is, but the Vietnam War was raging, and I expected to get a draft notice any day. So I started checking around. I started junior college, and I just was bored to death with it. And I wanted to be around airplanes. So I went to the Air Force, talked with them. The Air Force was a little different because I was really interested in airplanes. I wanted to be involved with aircraft, flying aircraft. And ironically, 18 and a half years old, I'd never even been on an airplane until I joined the service and was going to San Diego from Phoenix on my first airplane ride. So, but I wanted to be in aviation. So I went down and talked to the Navy, and they were desperate to have people. And they guaranteed me an aviation rate. A lot of guys that went in the Navy, they just ended up on a ship somewhere doing different things. The Air Force was kind of they did one thing. That my apologies to the Air Force, but that's what I was told. You take off a tire to fix it off an aircraft, and you don't repair it. You just take it off. That was your job. You repair it. Somebody else repairs it, and you put it back on. And the Navy was kind of different because the Navy was based on shipboard stuff. So you had to be trained in a lot of different things, and that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be in airplanes, on airplanes, around airplanes, anything like that. So they guaranteed me an aviation rate, and I signed up and got on my first airplane ride to San Diego from Phoenix, Arizona.
Well, I say, who to that? Now, starting military training, right? Going into that mindset, especially at a young age, what was boot camp like?
Well, a lot of boot camp, except for the shipboard firefighting training classes and the rifle range and all that stuff, that was pretty exciting. But the rest of it was pretty boring. A lot of drills and marching around and doing that kind of stuff. But it wasn't super exciting, but it was nice.
Now, during boot camp, did you already have structure, or did it help you gain structure or build out like a structured routine or environment?
Well, it helped me a little bit. I played football in high school, and so I had a mindset of working with other people and doing that. But boot camp was a good thing, really. I guess it taught me a lot about working with other people.
Did it prepare you for Vietnam though? Did it give you the adequate success you need in order to go out and actually accomplish mission?
Yeah, it did in that aspect, accomplishing a goal with others, but didn't prepare me for Vietnam. I don't know if you can be prepared for Vietnam.
Were you excited to go to Vietnam? I know first deployments are a little nerve-wracking, but I know some individuals find it exciting. What were you feeling in that moment when you knew, hey, I'm gonna get shipped off to Vietnam?
Well, I was concerned about my wife and my baby, Veronica. I guess I was concerned a little bit. I wasn't really nervous because by the time I went, I knew exactly what we were going to be doing in this new organization, VO-67. Because it was so secret, a lot of the people that were placed in it didn't even know what they were doing. They didn't know why we were there. Because I was electronic rated, I knew what the mission would entail and what we were going to do. And I really couldn't talk about much of that. And, even after we all got back together in 1999, a lot of guys said they didn't even know why we were over there until we were there for 6 months. So anyway, that's
Definitely. Thank you for sharing. I do, as someone who came out of boot camp in the 21st century and who goes on mission quite often, there's never really a way to prepare for disaster or to prepare for something that is just unpreparable. You can only accept what is given and move forward. But what is your stance on that?
well, I can remember on our first flight, my first combat mission. I'll never forget. It's Christmas Eve, 1967, and that's why I remember it, I guess. But when I was younger, I used to watch war movies and things, and you'd see tracers flying in the air off the ships and all that stuff. And they just kind of went up in a straight line. During that mission, Christmas Eve, 1967, I wasn't on one of the machine guns in the back on that flight, and I was back with the gunners, but I looked out the window and I saw it looked like ribbons that were glowing and they were shaking, but they weren't really shaking. That was us shaking. Um, we were getting, hit by different things. Anyway, I went up and I went into the radio compartment and looked out the window, and all of a sudden we were hit by small arms fire. So I actually asked one of the gunners, "What is that out there?" And he said, "Those are tracers." And that was my first experience of seeing tracers.
When you arrived, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. When you arrived in Vietnam, what was the forward operation base like, or the FOB? What was your base like?
Well, actually, because we were in Thailand, 9 miles from the Laotian border, it wasn't, I guess, under siege. VO-67 did something a little different, but we weren't in harm's way, hand-to-hand combat or anything like that, or down in the kimchi in the jungle or anything like that. But it was a nice base. It actually had a swimming pool, stuff like that. But again, it was in Thailand, and it wasn't. The missions were what was different.
So, what were your first assignments when you first got out there? What did they task you to do as your MOS, or your job occupancy?
Okay, well, I actually had 2 jobs. I worked at night on the flight line on a graveyard shift, and VO-67 always had aircraft ready for a mission the next day, and that's because the graveyard shift would, if there was a radio that went down or anything, it was repaired during the day, and at night it was put back in the aircraft, which I helped do and did. Did radio checks to make sure everything was working correctly. And my other job was I was also on a crew, assigned to a crew. And we did all our training in the States. A lot at Alameda Naval Air Station, which was our home base. But I monitored the sensors as they left the aircraft. That way we knew where they were going, where they were at, and whether they were working or not. And our biggest fear was if we laid in a string of sensors, and they were laid in sometimes at 100 feet in the air, hawk buoys, or the ad says like anywhere from 3,000 to 5,000 feet. We had to know if they were working correctly, or we had to go around. Our big fear was if they didn't work, they didn't come up, light up on the telltale system, which was part of the electronic stuff, we'd have to go back around and put another one in. So the first time we tried to surprise the enemy by just coming in at 100 feet, and they didn't know we were coming, and we startled them, and we were gone so fast that. But if we had to go back around, they were ready then. And of course, we had machine guns in the back. We had miniguns on the wings. And the minigun was probably our best protection, because it fired like between 3,000 and 4,000 rounds a minute, and it placed a slug every 4 square inches. So a lot to talk about here, rules of engagement and all that kind of stuff. Back then you couldn't shoot at anybody unless they shot at you first. And my pilot, Commander Hayden, he once told us that we would always be shot at as far as he was concerned. So we never came back with any ammunition left in the guns, either the machine guns in the back or the miniguns. So, but that was my job. I worked on the telltale system, which showed the electronic devices were working or not, and also as an aft gunner.
As someone who's currently an avionics mechanic working on, I moved from Chinooks to Blackhawks now, but as someone who can appreciate, the aircraft electrician piece, especially working on analog, I couldn't imagine that was easy. So, I respect you in all aspects of your jobs, because that is not an easy main course to try and eat.
Yeah, it was quite something.
So about VO-67,
Uh-huh.
what initiated the VO-67 squadron missions? What initiated that whole, hey, we need to have these individuals, or we need to have this set of missions done, and it needs to be covert?
Well, the technology really was known, but these aircraft were older aircraft that hunted submarines, so they dropped sonobuoys in the ocean to track submarines. Well, 1967 and 68 was really a tough year in Vietnam. We were losing a lot of people. Those were two of the toughest years. I don't know why they didn't they wanted to slow down the troop movements in Vietnam, going down the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and also the supply movements, and they thought this was the best way. In afterthought, I think the best way would have been to bomb the harbor or mine the harbor up in North Vietnam. But the administration at that time, I think that they were not wanting to get into a war that China would be involved in for some reason. I don't know why. So if you bomb the harbor, or it might be Chinese soldiers get killed, because they were there, and so were the Russian people. So they wanted to slow that movement down. So that's why we did it.
So you talked about your job. We talked about, how'd you become a part of VO-67. What do you remember the most from these missions?
I remember the heat. It was hot there. We wore flak vests, flak girdles, survival stuff, parachutes, all this stuff, and it was so hot there on those missions. I remember that. I remember I don't know if you've ever heard the word jinking.
Yeah.
We would jink, and I'm telling you, we would come in so low and so straight, and then when we implanted, everybody says drop, but we actually implanted these sensors. We would jink, or the pilot would jink us out of there, and that was something else.
I could imagine those turns at certain angles.
Up and down and up. I mean, it was crazy. I got so sick when we were training one time in Florida, Eglin. I decided, they said, well, we're going to go down there and we're going to work at the range down there and we're going to practice jinking. And then when I heard what it was, I thought, you know what? I'm not going to eat breakfast, because if I eat breakfast, I'll get sick.
It's going to go out the hole. That's where it's going to go out.
I didn't eat breakfast, and I was so sick, I thought I was going to die. And, I got on the intercom, and I was at the point where I actually thought I was going to die. I had the dry heaves. I was so sick. And I called the pilot, and I said, you have to get me on the ground or I'm going to die. And
level us out. Put my 2 feet on concrete. I'm done for, sir. I'm done.
That's pretty much what I was laying on the floor. I wasn't at a gun at that particular time. But all day long we were jinking, and I was so sick. And he actually started. He brought that aircraft in, and I remember the pilot was Captain Sharp. He was our leader of the squadron, and I don't remember who the co-pilot was, but I remember I still had my headphones and everything on my helmet, and I remember him saying, "Sir, that's and Captain Sharp. I mean, he was a captain. I was a little E3." He says, "Why are you landing?" And I can remember to this day Captain Sharp saying, "You know," he's told that co-pilot, "I've known people that have died from air sickness when it's prolonged that long in this heat." And he said, "We need Reynolds." So he landed. I got out of the rear hatch. My feet touched the ground, and I was cured. Motion sickness can really, really get to you.
Oh, yes, it can. In the Chinook, when she does her left bank, right banks at a 70-degree angle. Oh man,
Yeah. We
it is
used
quite
to
experience.
we used to do power takeoffs. We'd come in low over a runway, just screaming. The recips going, the jets,
Ooh.
and then pull up. And I actually saw my brain come out and roll down the way there. So anyway, I don't know why I wanted to be in airplanes, but there I was.
Hey, I completely as like I said, as someone who's currently in aviation, I completely understand the fixation on wanting to be around aircraft, but also kind of like, hey, there's some pros and cons to you flying
Yeah,
and getting in that
exactly.
air.
Yeah.
So understanding the experience now, right? So now we're in Vietnam. You know the mission. You've gone on plenty of missions, successful or unsuccessful, depending on however that mission's panned out. Were there moments where you experienced significant loss or witnessed something that deeply affected you?
Well, we lost. It was kind of a dream. I mean, we lost our first aircraft. We lost the MR2 and the whole crew, and it's still up in the air as far as whether they were shot down or they dove into a mountain in karst in Laos. Nobody really knows. But when I told you when I worked graveyard shift, I would go out on the line to replace a radio or something. I'd get in the aircraft, and after we lost crew two, it really bothered me because when you trained like we trained, everybody knew what everybody else was doing at all times in the aircraft. I got in the aircraft and I just kind of froze there because I was picturing in my mind what it must have been like. And of course, then I was still flying. So I could see everything happening. And I think a lot of guys are like that. So that bothered me. And I went up and I talked to my co-pilot. I made an appointment to go talk to him. His name was Thurman. A good guy, one of the best guys I've ever met in the squadron at that time. And I told him that it was really bothering me. And I didn't want to stop flying, but I just had to tell somebody. We didn't have like a BA to go to or anything like that. And you couldn't really talk to the other guys because they were probably hurting too. Anyway, I'll never forget, I was in his little office there and he said, Reynolds, he turned around and he showed me a picture on the wall behind him. He said, "This is my graduating class when I graduated." And he said, "You see that guy and that guy and that guy? They've all been killed." but I'm going to get through it. We're all going to get through it. And made me feel better. We didn't have any psychiatrists, like I said, but I continued to fly. And it wasn't too long after that that I lost my own crew. Now, there was 12 guys on a crew, 9 flew a mission, 3 enlisted would rotate out every mission. So we didn't risk all 12 people. And when we got hit on Christmas Eve, I went down and they had a little hobby shop there, and I bought a bunch of little jars of paint, and I painted, because we were the first aircraft to get hit by ground fire. I painted a little purple heart on the back hatch of MR5, which was my aircraft. And wasn't too long after that, I was serving the night before that mission when they were lost as a duty driver. And of course, we had a squadron never sleeps. It always has a duty driver and a master arms. So Joe Theodorczyk wanted to teach me how to play AC Doocy because I had never learned that game. So we were up all night. He yelled at me, I was the worst AC Doocy player that he ever wanted to see. And the next morning we had a mission, and we were both on the same crew. So we went down, we checked out our rifles, our 38s, which were a joke, all of that stuff. And we went down to the aircraft, and the pilot took one look at us, and we'd been up all night long. He said, "You guys aren't going." And we had 2 other guys that were there. We always went down and helped the guys leave. So 2 other guys were there, and he says, "Okay, you're going to go, and you're going to go." And that was Dawson and Martin, 2 guys on our crew. So Joe and I didn't go. And we had to give them our weapons and all of that stuff. They left, and they were shot down that day. But they all perished. That bothered me a lot.
I can't fathom losing a whole squadron. I mean, I could imagine losing like battle buddies here and there because I have, in my experience, being in the military, and I couldn't imagine the psychological effect it would have on someone to see, like I said, an entire squadron in front of you just, yeah, as you said, perish. So, for you to continue the mission and for you to continue on, and like you said, paint the Purple Heart, like you were still celebrating their life and celebrating them in such a impactful way that when you move forward with the mission, I'm sure that you kept them at the forefront.
Absolutely. And, we lost 3 aircraft and 20 people during that about 6.5 month period because it was so dangerous. It's you're in helicopters. I don't know if you've ever heard of HAL 3. It was a Navy most decorated helicopter squadron in the Vietnam War. And they kind of adopted us a little bit because we were so lost for a long time. They weren't secret, but we were. And I was told by several of those members that they would have never got in those aircraft and flown in a straight line for 3.5, 4 minutes in a straight line at 100 feet in the air. They would never have done that. So, we lost 3 aircraft, but we were expected to lose 75% of our people, air crews. Excuse me.
So now you told me, the experience and how it affected you. Did you ever find it hard to process or make sense of certain events during your service? Did anything like stand out to you that was maybe confusing, or it just some things weren't really adding up?
Uh, well, I first of all, I couldn't understand exactly why we were doing what we were doing, and it could have been done in a different way. Like I said, mining a harbor and that kind of stuff. I think a lot of it was political because they didn't want to go to war with China or the Russians, and they were all involved on the other side. We had a chief petty officer that flew with us, and he could speak Russian. And when one of our aircraft, we were flying, and one of our aircraft uh, went down, and he's listening on this radio, and he could hear Russians talking, and he understood what they were saying. They were saying, "Look over here, he's over this way," or they were trying to locate the down pilot. I'm not sure if it was one of ours or if it was a fat guy or whatever. But I ended up, uh, a lot of guys we formed really good relationships and friendships. And after I lost my crew, one of my very good friends, John Hartside, and another friend, Billy Joe Conrad, I was concerned about coming back, So I asked them if they would please be godfathers. I'm sorry, Robert.
No, it's perfectly fine. I completely understand. Like I said, I'm in the service. This vulnerability piece is something that I hold dear to my heart, and especially if it's about you in service. If something's happening here, man, you can lay it out on me. This is a very transparent podcast, and I do implore you to let it out if you need to, man. I am here for you.
Thank you, Robert. Sorry. Um, anyway, I asked them if they would become godfathers to my daughter, and they both agreed. John Hartsheim ended up being killed um, in the squadron, and Billy Joe Conrad just passed away recently. But we had that kind of bond. I don't even remember what the question was, Robert. I'm sorry.
No,
Originally,
it's
I'm just
completely.
letting it rip. I don't know.
It's all good.
Yeah.
So my next question is, you know, you shared some very vulnerable pieces, with me and with the viewers. Can you can you make it make sense for viewers at home how certain traumatic experiences have shaped your perspective on life? Because I know that, for me, when I saw my battle buddies go down, whether it's, due medical injury or, whether they take their own life, the way I view my life and me being around people is completely different from the way I viewed it before the military. So in your aspect, how did those traumatic experiences change your perspective on life?
Well, I didn't get involved with the VA until 2005. Um, uh, I had a friend in a metal detecting club who was ex-Air Force, and he knew there was something happening here, and he invited me to go to lunch one time. And he didn't take me to lunch; he took me to the VA, and I didn't have anything before that, but I knew that there was something that wasn't exactly right with me. Now, First, let me say that, I served in several squadrons when I was in the Navy. And I can't tell you the name of one person in any of those squadrons, with the exception of VO-67. I can just about name all 325 of those guys. It was something that was different. So I tried to do the right thing. And uh, I really learned the teamwork thing, in a large group, like the whole squadron, and in a small group, like a crew, combat crew. Um, and I have thought about VO-67 every day since the day that I joined it. Now, I was one in the commissioning ceremony in Alameda. There was, I think, 25 or 30 of us that went up there. Everybody was different places, training, doing different things. I went to about 5 factory schools, they call factory schools, Martin Marietta, Lockheed, different places. But teamwork, I think, was the biggest thing I learned about that.
Thank you. So, post VO-67 now, when you had to come back after mission, were you assigned to anything after VO-67?
Yeah, I was put in a patrol squadron, a VP-47, and they had P-3 Orions. At that point in time, I was kind of a short timer, so I didn't end up on a crew. But I joined the squadron, and like 2 weeks later, they went back over to Sangley Point in the Philippines. And here I'd only seen my wife for 2 or 3 weeks, and I was going right back over there. But I'll tell you one thing, because I had been at Sangley Point before, all these younger sailors, they wanted to know all about it, and I had to. You go into Cavite City there, and if you don't wear your watch, because if you wear your watch, you're never gonna make it back with it, because the kids will get it off you somehow. They crowd around you and they're pulling on you and they're undoing your watch. So I became the big hero, the go-to guy on Sangley Point for the younger guys, for the airmen and younger guys.
Nice. Well, I'm very happy you were able to utilize that in life experience to let them know, hey, protect yourself. Big things happen out here when you're overseas.
Yep.
So returning from Vietnam, finally, life after Vietnam, was it a culture shock coming back home after all that you've gone through? Was anything just like, oh my God?
Well, I was in the day of the hippie. When I was there were hippies everywhere, war protests and all that kind of stuff. And of course, I couldn't really, once I got out of the service, I couldn't talk about any of that stuff. We were all sworn to secrecy with, 25, 30-year prison terms if we talked about it. And, I went to work for a company, Teledyne Systems in Northridge, California, and they produced all the computers that were in the 747 jumbo jet. And so, because I had all this experience in electronics and stuff, I don't want to date myself, but transistors were just coming in, big time at that point.
Ooh-wee, yeah.
Transistor anymore, but anyway, there were a lot of long-haired people working in that place, and a lot of them were really strange.
Coming back from buzz cut to long hair.
But anyway, good people there.
Definitely. So, how did you manage the memories or emotions related to your more difficult experiences?
Well, I really couldn't talk about it, and I didn't until, we weren't even declassified until 1999. And I think how I just thought about it every day, tried to adjust everything in my mind of, what we had done. It was good stuff, really. And I would see, like a serviceman or a guy wearing a hat with, Vietnam veteran on it and all that. And I often wondered, did my guys I served with, they could have possibly blown up the ammunition that would have killed that guy. So we did good stuff. We saved a lot of lives. I mean, the truck kills were tripled while we were there doing that. And I thought about it every day. But when I got involved in the VA, then I was able to talk to somebody, because I didn't know I had post-traumatic stress at all until that friend of mine took me to the VA, because he could tell. And I'm not sure, Robert.
It's all right, Bob. I appreciate what you're sharing now. And I know it can be a difficult conversation, and I just want to remind you that I do appreciate your reflection and your sharing on your experiences with the VO-67 squadron and the top secret missions. You said you had one guy who was your support system, that single guy, he brought you to the VA, did that help you kind of figure out, like you said, post-traumatic stress disorder? Did it kind of help you figure out, hey, like this is what's going on with me, this is where I need help, and then did you receive adequate help from the VA?
I did eventually. It took a while, but when we had that reunion in 1999, that was probably the thing that saved me, because nobody knew where anybody was or where they went, or you couldn't share memories with anybody. You couldn't talk to your shipmates. And when we had that reunion, back then, officers and enlisted men didn't hang out at a bar or something together. They were apart. But in 1999, those officers became some of the best friends I ever had. When I think about, being the pilot, an OPC of one of those gunships, has got to be so difficult. I mean, you have yourself, there's 9 men on a combat crew when they're in operation. You got yourself and 8 other people that depend on you to keep them alive. Now, I belong to a group called the Enlisted Combat Air Crew Association. And their motto is, I entrust my fate. And those 8 other guys in that aircraft, if you're on the ground fighting in a jungle or you're being attacked, you can maybe get down lower on the ground or defend yourself or something. But when you're flying in an aircraft that's being shot up, there's one person, the OPC, the pilot, that is flying that aircraft, and he's got so much responsibility to keep those guys alive. I respect them so much. We had outstanding pilots, all of them. They were all from different backgrounds, but I entrusted my fate to them, and so did the other crews that flew. I think that you all interviewed one of our pilots, Commander Kochi. What a great guy he is. I don't know if I could have handled that responsibility to have 8 lives. You can't do anything. Like I said, when you're on the ground, you can get under cover or whatever, but when you're flying, somebody else is flying you, you've got no place to go. You have to trust people. And they were good. They were really good.
like you said, and trust my fate to that pilot. So, and it's in a renaissance. It's the same for the aviation world now. When you go up in that aircraft, you have to trust that your pilot knows to keep you out of harm's way and to bring you back alive from that mission. So, to hear that it's even, it was like it started, or it was from even back then, and now it's still being said to today, that speaks volumes on aviation as a whole, specifically military aviation, in my aspect, and I think for you as well. But now we're gonna hop into, because we talked about life after Vietnam, so now we're gonna hop into starting your new career and family. What was that like after you transitioned out of the military, and you were able to find that civilian job in California? What was that whole process like?
Well, I didn't make very much in being an E4 in the military. And again, I'll date myself, but I got that job at Teledyne Systems. I was making, I think it was $2.75 an hour. And that, back in those days, that was kind of like a lot of money to somebody like me. But what was the question again, Robert? I'm sorry, my mind is just going off.
No, it's fine. It's the question was starting your new career and family. What was that like after the military?
Well, like I say, that working on those aircraft or those computers for that aircraft. Now I'm terrible on a computer, but back then, I was really good on that kind of stuff. But there's finally a chance for my wife and I and our baby to get a life. It still bothered me, everything that happened there. But I didn't know what happened to anybody else. They all just kind of went into the woodwork and just disappeared because I don't know. It helped me to work, to work on a team.
So we're coming down to our final few questions. Now we're going to go into our reflection. So would you recommend joining the military in today's age for new civilians who are thinking about joining the military? Would you recommend it to them?
Well, I enjoyed most of my military. Up until yesterday, I'm not sure, election day, I'm not sure that I would have, with all this wokeness and all that stuff, I don't know if I would have recommended it. But during normal situations, military is great for becoming a member of a team, teamwork, communications. I think it was good for me. I was a single child. My mother raised me. I never knew who my father was. So doing that kind of stuff, I learned to work with other people and that kind of stuff.
Thank you. What are some of your biggest lessons your experiences have taught you? As you said, one of them is teamwork. Has there been any other lesson that has really stood out to you?
Well, to never give up, to try different things, always go for an adventure. I'm a treasure hunter is my hobby, and going on adventures and things even being in VO-67 was an adventure most of the time, but not all of the time. I would recommend that somebody join the military.
Nice. And finally, what advice would you give to younger veterans or those who are currently serving, especially regarding the emotional challenges of military life? What would you tell them if they're going through emotional challenges of military life?
Well, I'm a firm believer these days in VA, um, and they've helped me quite a bit. Write down any friend you have. Write down their social security number, because if you ever get separated from them, you don't know if they've passed away. We have several of our members that if we'd had their social security number, we would know if they're dead or alive. So we don't know where a lot of them are. I guess that's about it. I'm probably a pretty poor interview, because I get emotional and it's hard for me to get everything out. But the military service is great. It really is great. And I have two grandsons that I wish would have joined the military, but they didn't. But you can only do what you can do.
Yeah, when I joined, I was kind of in a crossroads. I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I knew I needed to do something. So I looked at a whole bunch of business cards I got from this job fair, and the Army National Guard card stood out like a sore thumb because of the colors, it's bright yellow, and it just stood out. So I gave them a call, and from that call, I basically have obtained not just a plethora of knowledge and expertise, but like you said, that teamwork, that support system. Nothing can beat the military support system as far as leaning on your battle buddies for support, or shooting the stuff with your squadron, or in my case with my squad, or with just soldiers around me. And I would highly recommend joining the military. If you want to stay stateside, they do have the Air National Guard for Air Force, and then the California, or not, sorry, the U.S. Army National Guard for your Army service. But yeah, I do thank you, Bob. And even if you said that you're having a hard time getting everything out, you have given such valuable gems, and you dropped so much knowledge that this will be essentially internalized or given to the community, to the masses, and it's all up to their interpretation as far as the history behind VO-67, and your personal experience. And the way you storytell, Bob, you actually put me in a mindset of kind of where you were at. Like when you said Vietnam was just hot and you guys were jinking all over the place, like I was able to, in a similar fashion, step into that mindset in my head and kind of see what was going on from a very military's perspective. Obviously not the personal perspective, but from a military perspective, stepping onto an aircraft, or seeing an aft gunner, or the traumatic loss, and how that emotional how those emotions affect you. So I do appreciate you for sharing, and trust me, you gave more than what was expected of you. So I do appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Robert. And I'm not going to hold that Army stuff against you. But it seemed like the longer I talked and I talked about it, the slower I got, because it just brings it all to the forefront. And it's, I try my best now. We have our association and everything, and I want, it's my dream that all these guys who never got the recognition at the time that they deserve, because we couldn't talk about it, that they get what they deserve, and that's the different wings and the accolades from their families. There were some people, and I've worked with the officers on getting boots on the ground established for a lot of these guys that enlisted, because their service record shows them going into a training squadron, VP-31, and the next entry is them coming out of VP-31. It never mentions the VO-67. It never mentions them, doing the stuff that they did. And I want to make sure that they get what they deserve. And so I've tried to do that. Agent Orange, supposedly that was never in an area where we were, but it was right next to where we worked. It was all over the place. And a lot of guys can't get any help from the VA because of Agent Orange. They weren't in Vietnam, but they used Agent Orange other places. So,
Well, I know this has been a very touchy subject based off of the emotions behind it, and we have come now to our closing. So I do want to thank you for everything you've shared. I can only hope and pray that your squadron gets the rightful and just accolades they deserve sooner than later.
well, we did get the Presidential Unit Citation.
Well, there you go.
Just a few years ago, because
Nice.
nobody knew we existed. So that's good.
All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for watching. I do appreciate your time, energy, and your listening ears. And I do hope you learned something from this podcast. Thank you very much, and I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you, Robert.